All right, so we got some breaking news. Ammo prices are set to rise again substantially in 2024. The ammo warehouses of the world are clearing out. Not only does that raise the risk and elevate the specter of nuclear conflict, because of course when you run out of conventional weapons, you got to use non-conventional ones, but that also means that the civilian population is going to be constrained in their access to these things, which is why the U.S. government said 3 months ago that they were going to be putting an export ban on firearms. Now, you're probably wondering, what's up with the LARP, Nate? Well, I watched a movie called Leave the World Behind last night, and I figured I needed a good LARP in a video because that one put me in the mood for Tiotwaki. You know, it's seldom that a apocalypse movie comes along nowadays that really captivates the imagination. That one most certainly did. I'm not saying it was a great movie. There was much left to be desired there, but I would say that it was a masterpiece of predictive programming. I mean, they're telling us what's about to happen. I'm going to do a deep dive into the movie, probably actually next, right after I release this video. I'll do it. I might release it later tonight or early tomorrow, because I just felt that it was a great satirical look at the divisive nature of our society and why Western society is bound for collapse, why the things that are getting you by right now in the urbanized metropolis is not going to be what helps you survive when the grid goes down. So I certainly would recommend. Is there spoilers in my review? There may be, but it's one of those movies that it doesn't matter because there's so much left to be known and so much uncertainty and cliffhangers that it's not going to matter, because there's still going to be enough mystery that's going to keep it interesting even if you know how the movie ends. Now, let's talk about this ammo situation. So, Vista Outdoor is a parent company to many firearms businesses, one of the biggest, ammo producers in the United States, the biggest. Surprisingly, their stock is down, much down from its all-time highs, probably by like 50%, which is interesting because there ain't a lot of buys in this market. Now, if you're a person who, has no moral qualms with buying stock in arms industry, then there might be something for you to look into there. Otherwise, we need to talk about why exactly there's an ammunition shortage around the world. And I think it's important to note that many countries around the world are currently surreptitiously preparing for a massive war, and they're probably not letting it on. So I don't believe for a second this talk that NATO is running out of ammunition, that we're running out of weapons. I think this is a feint, and I think it's part of the reason why the Russians haven't fully taken the bait as of yet, because they're trying to goad the Russians into a conflict where they're going to be destroyed. And in the spirit of Austerlitz, I think that the Russians have learned the mistakes of history and aren't taking the bait, and it's precisely why they haven't went full-blown into Ukraine just yet, so they don't make their flanks vulnerable. Anyways, we're about to see a 7% rise in shot shells. Now, that might not seem like a lot, but here in Canada, the price of ammo is through the roof. I mean, a couple days worth of shooting, the amount of money it costs you for a couple days worth of shooting is the price of a whole gun. So I don't know if it's better in the United States. I know prices have come down precipitously since 2020 and the 2021 emergence of new preppers into the market, but it's still very, very high here in Canada, in spite of the increased availability, with the exception of lack of ability of 5.56 and 2.23, and I'm sure there's some other calibers that I just don't shoot and not aware of. Anyways, rifle ammunition up 7%, handgun ammunition up 5%, 22 long rifle up 5%, WMR, HMR up 7%, primers 5%, and Alliant powder up 10%. So we are seeing increases in commodities, from copper to what are the other things that they need? Lead, of course. And not even so much on a year-to-year basis, but when you look back at like the year 2000, 2005, the prices for every component of a bullet were much cheaper. Everything from potassium nitrate, saltpeter, like the gunpowder itself, to brass, copper, lead, all of these elements of a bullet are much more expensive than they used to be. And this is something people fail to consider when you're looking at the amount of weapons that we're giving to Ukraine. We're perhaps measuring that. I don't think it's inflation adjusted, and even if it was, it wouldn't account for the true value of that bullet. Because when the United States manufactured a lot of that ammunition, it was much cheaper to manufacture, not just inflation adjusted, but just in real terms, it was much, much cheaper. So now, in order to replace that bullet, it costs 3 times as much. Now, this puts a big drag on the global financial system, as you can imagine, not only because war is not good for most business in the short term. Yes, it can stimulate economy in various ways, but it's important to keep in mind that all wars are resource wars. And this is all about energy. Energy is the number one commodity, the number one reason why nations go to war in modern in modern society, in contemporary world. This is why nations go to war. It's a war for energy. Until we figure out nuclear fusion and it's just a conspicuous consumption free-for-all from that point forward, people are going to be fighting over energy. We're going to talk about oil prices and why the markets are so deceptive. But we need to also keep in mind that just 3 months ago, actually it wasn't 3 months ago, it was on October 31st, I believe, when the U.S. government halted the export of civilian firearms and ammunition for 90 days. I believe that they are either secretly hoarding, secretly manufacturing, not disclosing all of the ammunition that they are in fact manufacturing at this point in time. NATO is under no obligation, as far as I know, to disclose to the rest of the world, and I'm sure there's some national security clause that comes into play whereby it would allow them to not disclose exactly what they're providing a country, an ally in wartime, so not to give away their secrets. I mean, why on earth would they tell the Russians in the first place everything that they're sending? Why is Germany, providing this list of things that they're sending Ukraine? What sort of strategic sense, tactical sense even, does that make? It makes none whatsoever, aside from maybe some posturing and minor deterrence that might be gained from the issuance of a list of weapons that we're providing. Is this supposed to slow the Russians down? Is that the thinking? I don't know, but I don't believe that what they're telling us they're sending is actually what they're sending. I don't believe that what they're telling us they're stockpiling, what they're telling us with respect to the nuclear testing and the proliferation of nuclear weapons. I don't believe anything that they say, because under the guise of national security, they can keep a lot of this stuff quiet. So when they say that they're halting civilian firearms exports for 90 days, you know it's bad. You know it's bad when the number one manufacturer of ammo is coming out and saying that we have to raise the prices across the map, even though year over year, the prices of a lot of the components of ammunition haven't went up. Yes, they've went up markedly since the early 2000s. There's no doubt about that. And some commodities have. It's likely that they understand that there will be a massive increase in the price of these commodities in the future, because at the base of all of it is the price of energy, okay? Even the Ukrainians are saying that they need to establish their own production of ammunition, as the shortage is felt all over the world. The warehouses of the world are empty. The Prime Minister in Ukraine, Denis Shmyhal, said to the Financial Times, "We have a huge shortage of ammo, not only in Ukraine, but also in the whole of the world. We understand that we have to produce it here because all over the world it is finished." Now, if they produce it there, how is it not just going to be blown up by the Russians right away? I mean, I don't understand. If you believe that the Russians have these missiles which cannot be defended against, which the Russians claim, then there shouldn't be any weapons manufacturing happening in Ukraine. The fact that they're even considering this at all, and there's companies that are willing to invest in this, tells you that there's a lot more to this conflict than we're being told, okay? So I also want to talk about how oil plays into this, because people need to understand the irrationality of the markets right now. And please don't turn off that dial, because I was speaking with an energy expert recently, yesterday in fact, and they reaffirmed a lot of my concerns about the global energy market. One thing to keep in mind is that the price, as priced in US dollars, is not a reflection of reality. Now, I know you're thinking you've heard this all before, but let me try to put this in perspective for you. The value of 1 barrel of oil, the true value of a barrel of oil. I can't remember the exact amount of man hours that it's equivalent to, but it's something to the effect of 5 years of human labor or thousands and thousands of hours of human labor to get the equivalent of what you would get out of 1 barrel of oil. So if you took that same liquid fuel and put it into, converted it into its various components, gasoline, diesel, all the rest, and you took that corresponding fuel and utilized it in a tractor, say, it could do the work of one human being working continuously for years and years on end. That's how much value is in 1 barrel of oil, something which is in shorter and shorter supply in the world every day, as we're going to talk about. But why is it then that this is only $70 per barrel if it can do that much human activity? Okay, why is it that the price of oil went negative during the pandemic? Negative. And this tells you the irrationality of our financial system and the global system of trade. Because in no rational world would anybody have to give away oil, right? Give away something which is so incredibly rare, it's valuable, it's what all wars are fought over. And so this idea that the price of oil right now has been marginally suppressed by these artificial factors and market forces is a misnomer. It is misguided, I should say. It's something which is not going to remain the same. And for the following reason, this is really the core crux of the matter, is that since human beings started using oil, okay, we used 1 trillion barrels of oil in all of human history. That's what's been used approximately. I think the closest estimate is around 956 billion barrels, but let's just round up to 1 trillion just to be on the safe side. Now, we have 1.6 billion barrels left, according to the most up-to-date estimates of various reserves around the world. Now, could there be new reserves that spring up? Absolutely. But that includes Venezuela. That includes what we know about the Arctic. And a lot of that stuff, even if we are able to find it, is likely going to be in a place that is far more inaccessible, or possibly in a place in a contentious region where there's a war happening, or whatever the case might be. So according to researchers then, based on current consumption patterns, that's current consumption patterns, that's assuming that the consumption rate is going to stay the same, which it hasn't been, okay, because the population of the developed world is going up. They're trying to achieve standard of living parity with us, which is going to necessitate that they use more energy. Energy is directly correlated with GDP. What are we going to need to pay down our debt? A constant increase in GDP. The only way you do that is by burning more calories on the whole, by utilizing more energy. So we know that we are destined to utilize even more energy. So why is this incredibly precious liquid sunlight, as my guest called it yesterday, because this, of course, where all energy on Earth originates in some way, shape, or form, why is this being traded at $70 a barrel right now? Well, it's because the markets are completely flawed, deceptive, irrational. They don't represent reality. In the same way they don't represent the gold reality, only in oil's case, there's an actual actionable function to it above and beyond just its value as a precious metal, a rare commodity. Anyways, on average, now this is very important, the industry aims to recover around 30 to 40% of the original oil in place. Original oil in place, OOIP, from conventional oil reservoirs using standard recovery techniques, okay? Now, and that's just conventional oil. So only 30% of that 1.6 trillion barrels that's left, and remember, we've already used 1 trillion, most of that in like the last 20 to 30 years. Okay, so you think, oh, the human history, we've really only seen this level of industrialization for the last few decades if we're talking on a global scale. I mean, China has only industrialized really in the last 20 years. So also worth knowing, people will say, well, what about shale oil, fracking, this kind of stuff? Well, 5 to 20% of that oil is actually recoverable. Now, when we say recoverable, we mean that it's recoverable in a lucrative sense, meaning not only does it have to be financially lucrative, but there reaches a point of diminishing returns in that it takes more energy to invest. That's the amount of energy invested to the amount of energy gained. So in the past, you might have received 100 barrels of oil from 1 barrel of oil invested. Today, depending on some endeavors, it could be 2 barrels of oil all the way up to 30, but a far cry from that 100 barrels that we got in the past. Okay, so what this truly means then is that there's around 680 billion barrels of oil that are recoverable. At our current consumption rates, this would give us 2 decades left. Now, so long as the pumps are going, right? And this is why they're scrambling for nuclear power, okay? The whole carbon smokescreen thing, and I think that's what it is. I think the true thing is that we are in fact running out. The low-hanging fruit is most definitely running out. People are going to say, no, we had this huge blowout year in terms of exports of fuel. And I'll say, okay, yeah, but how's the strategic oil reserve doing, right? And they'll say, well, production may have peaked in and around the 2018 to 2020 region, but a lot of OPEC countries are withholding what they're putting out. And then some people will push back at that and say, well, are the Saudis really withholding, or is it that they can't actually pump more, or that they don't want to because they know how precious it is and they don't want to sell it at such a low price because they think the price should be much more than it's currently being sold for. So at current consumption rates, we're talking about 20 years, okay, of relatively, I don't even want to say cheap because it's not going to be cheap. There's going to reach an inflection point where people realize where the reality cannot be papered over anymore. But all you need to know about the irrationality of oil prices and why they don't reflect what's actually in the ground is what happened in 2020 when prices went negative, when you have this perfectly good oil that companies are saying, oh, well, we need these ships, these ships are waiting, we got to pay all the workers and yada, yada. So it's a liability as opposed to an asset. I get that, but that doesn't mean that the actual value of the commodity is less. That's where the irrationality enters the market equation, okay? So what this means is that things, and this is really scary when you think about it, because what this means is that at any point, the reality is going to hit the markets in terms of the preciousness of not only precious metals, but commodities as well, okay? These various commodities, which is why I think that we're in the beginning of a massive commodities super cycle, although super cycle seems to think at some point the price is going to come down. I think the price only comes down if a huge portion of the population goes extinct, because that's the only way we are going to use less energy. It's always been the tendency when there's a new method of energy utilized that we're going to use more of it. So when we do ultimately invent nuclear fusion with the help of super quantum computers and artificial intelligence, we're just going to use more energy. So whatever we gain from that process will be rapidly depleted. It's just in our nature as a species. Some people might debate that it's in our nature as a species, and perhaps that's what that movie was trying to signify. That movie, Leave the World Behind, which we're going to do a deep dive review of in the near future. But understand that everything we're seeing right now is a war for energy, okay? And this is why the Houthis are basically holding the Saudi oil fields for ransom, saying if you do not refrain from attacking the Gaza Strip, of course, talking to Israel and the United States, we're going to light it up, okay? That's going to be their first move, and that's just not them speaking. That's likely at the behest of the Iranians as well. Now, speaking of the Iranians, nuclear situation, okay? Now, understand that the nuclear push that we're seeing right now, this mad dash into nuclear, is it's not unprecedented. Now, we've been talking for a while about how the United States has been stockpiling to the rafters as much of this special uranium, enriched uranium that they get from Russia for their nuclear reactors. In fact, it tripled once again in October. The U.S. paid $62 million for 43 tons of Russian uranium, marking the second largest shipment in Russian trade history. The total uranium imports for October reached nearly 176 tons, crossing the 300 million mark. Russia supplies 25% of the enriched uranium for U.S. commercial reactors. A 25% shortfall in energy for the U.S. power grid would equate to probably a doubling, if not a tripling, of price. Because you got to remember, it goes to the highest bidder, right? Unless you put some sort of government price controls in place. Anyways, what this all means is that they're stocking up, because ultimately there is a bill banning the import of enriched uranium into the U.S. This was put to vote on December 6th. I don't know if it passed. I believe that that was supposed to come in 2024. So they're scrambling to get as much of this stuff as they possibly can, that only the Russians make this specific grade of enriched uranium. So they're trying to get as much as they can before the war with NATO starts. And if you don't think the war with NATO starts, as I've always said, I do not take what they say at face value. According to Ukrainian Defense Minister Rustam Umerov, he is saying, and I don't know why the hell you would say this, maybe this is just misdirection, misinformation. Why the fuck you would say this? Ukraine is preparing a cunning plan for the next year that will force the Russians to leave Crimea forever. When you learn about it, you will be surprised. Now, to me, it's like, if you have a plan, you know, as the saying goes, if you're going to shoot, shoot. Don't talk, right? Why, you know, maybe they're just trying to get the Russians to keep a sizable amount of forces there so they don't move them towards the front. That's probably what this is. But you can't take anything these guys say at face value at this point in time. Because when so much of the battlefield is surveilled, the only true deceit you are able to put over your opponent is in the information space, is in what you are saying, because you can't hide what you're doing. You can under the cover of night to a certain degree using camouflage and whatnot, but for the most part, it's difficult to fully conceal. So anything they say, I'm almost thinking that they're actually doing the opposite, okay? Now, the issue of the Iranian nuclear program is arising again in the media. They've made significant progress in their nuclear program, and it's only a matter of time before they're going to be able to potentially produce a nuclear weapon. I know we've been hearing this for the last 20 years, but now it's a reality, and this whole JCPOA is essentially at an impasse, and that means that it's do or die now if they want to prevent the Iranians from getting a nuclear weapon, and that's the end game here. Remember, if Iran gets a nuke, they become untouchable to the international community. And by that, I mean the golden billion that is the West. Okay, now the Houthis, the honey badgers of the Middle East, have reiterated their threats, and they've doubled down, and they've now said that they're going to escalate by blocking all ships en route to Israel. So not just Israeli ships. So essentially that could mean any ship that's traversing the Red Sea through the Suez Canal, they're going to target. The decision came after the U.S. vetoed a resolution for a ceasefire and immediate release of all hostages, after which Russia and China strongly condemned the United States. So here is where the Russians appear to be more strictly aligning themselves with the Muslim world, or part of it anyways. Recall Putin's visit to the UAE and Saudi Arabia recently. Now, the UAE may well, based on my sources, be the one that actually spearheads this war with the Yemenis. Now, this leads for a very confusing set of entanglements in terms of who's on whose side. And I guess there's going to be a lot of people who are kind of fence sitters who are going to have to choose a side at the last moment. We know the Iranians, as I expressed in one of my most recent videos, when the leader Raisi of Iran sat down with Vladimir Putin, I sensed within him some distrust of Vladimir Putin, and I sensed a more conniving demeanor with Vladimir Putin in terms of what we were able to see of that exchange. So I don't believe that the Iranians are fully convinced that the Russians are on their side. because, of course, the Iranians never did receive the S-400 missile defense system. As far as I know they might have engineered a system which is very similar, and maybe that's how they were able to sidestep the sanctions and global pressures. But I don't know if that relationship is as hard and fast as people think it is. So I guess we'll see in time. But either way, the Houthis are going to ramp up the attacks, and we are undoubtedly seeing a gradual, incremental, but insidious mission creep into full-blown conflict in the Middle East. That's why these prices for oil right now are absolutely insane. I mean, I'm not going to give any financial advice on this channel, but knowing everything I just told you, there's no way this mad dash into nuclear is going to be able to. Yes, is it theoretically possible that we could build enough nuclear power plants? Some people would say no. Some people would just outright say it's physically impossible to build enough renewable and nuclear energy infrastructure in a quick enough period of time to avert not only a social economic catastrophe, but a climactic one as well. Okay, we're not going to get into the politics of that. I'm not proposing solutions. I'm not Greta Thunberg. I'm not the WEF 2030, anything like that. I'm not Justin Castro. I'm the Canadian prepper. I think for myself. I understand the science. Just because somebody is telling you what is going on doesn't necessarily mean that they're making any prescriptions or endorsing any government prescriptions, nonetheless, about what should be done as a result of that, okay? So we are looking at an increasing contraction in terms of the availability of raw materials, not only for oil, but for bullets as well. And as that, vice tightens around us, as the walls cave in terms of resource availability, what are countries going to be left with? One of my primary concerns, we made a very well-produced short video about this, which never got any traction in the algorithm for some reason. Thank you very much, YouTube. Once they run out of conventional weapons, what else do they have to use but nuclear weapons? Okay, and that's what's scary. There was a nationwide power outage in Sri Lanka. What was the reason? Possibly a cyber attack. Who really knows at this point in time? The core plot for the movie Leave the World Behind, and this isn't a spoiler because I think this is present in one of the trailers, is it was a cyber attack related. But there's a lot of mystery surrounding what exactly is affected by the cyber attack. So they're priming us to get ready to accept the idea that a cyber attack is going to be what's next. The average family grocery bill is to go up $700 next year, according to Canada's food price report. And this is not going to be aided by the potential closure of waterways. Did I mention that? Suez Canal, Panama Canal is also backed up by 30% right now due to drought conditions. But of course, the Suez Canal, if that gets slowed down and stymied as a result of what's going on with the Houthis there, you can expect that food prices are only continue to go up because a lot of things that pass through the Red Sea, through the Suez Canal, are globally traded commodities. So that means that if they increase in price at their destination, they're going to increase in price here. Now, $700 over, I believe, the amount of money that Canadians spend, average family spends on food is $16,000. I think that's kind of lowballing a bit, depending on which family, I guess. Could you survive off that much? Could you survive off half of that if you were utilizing wholesale and couponing aggressively? Absolutely. But $700 tacked on to the inflation we've already seen. So we're barely seeing disinflation in the food markets. We're certainly not seeing deflation, which is exactly what we would need. And on top of this, that doesn't factor in things like shrinkflation. It doesn't factor in things like the reduced nutrient deficiency, the increased nutrient deficiency, I should say, because of the various workarounds that they have to utilize to make up for the increased price of transport, you know, the use of chemicals, the resource availability of various things, the global trade restrictions that are coming into play. So all of these things factor into perpetual increase in food and commodities prices. So, well, computers actually aren't even as cheap as they used to be. Did you notice that? Like the price of computers, they were always progressively going down, it would seem. But for the last couple of years, you're not seeing a huge Murphy's Law, at least not converting in terms of what that means for your pocketbook and that technological deflation that we're all accustomed to. And we've been spoiled by due to cheap labor from China, which is no more. Anyways, guys, keep on prepping and go out and get some ammo. Ammo, medicine. Remember the video we just did on the strategic reserves? There's a reason why the U.S. has a war reserve stock, why the U.S. has water reservoirs all over the country, why they have a grain reserve in many countries. They don't have it here. They probably should, because we believe that, well, we're never going to have shortages of grain here because we produce so much and we're such a net exporter. But there's a reason why we have a strategic oil reserve, okay? There's a reason why we have, what else is there? A medical reserve. There's the strategic medical stockpile hidden throughout the country. And I believe it's 16 warehouses, like 16 massive warehouses that are made to be disguised as normal warehouses. This is open source information. You think I'm just making this up, but this is the truth. And we did a whole video on that very topic. And this is why you should make your own strategic stockpile. I do not personally believe that anything that provides material value that is not equated in terms of software or something that is going to potentially diminish in its utility over time due to a change in firmware and hardware, like software. Anything asides, technologies that require what they call network externalities, which are related to contemporary availability of like the contemporary infrastructure of things. We're talking about bullets, food, tools, an axe. An axe is always going to be worth what an axe is worth, so long as there are trees to cut down. A saw is always going to have the same inherent intrinsic value. That's why you can never go wrong buying stuff. The problem is the stuff that we buy as a society in North America is the shit that we don't need. We fill our garages up with this stuff that we maybe use once every 10 years. And instead, you could, invest a fraction of what you put into the conspicuous consumption to fill that dopamine in your head, right? We're exchanging, what did my guest say yesterday? He said, we're exchanging this liquid, precious liquid sunlight for short little bursts of dopamine in our brains. Instead of doing that, just create a little reserve. Take a fraction of what you spend on renovating your new home. People talk about, prepping's so expensive, we're all out to make $1. 99.9% of the market is for stuff which is just frivolous purchases. Things that we don't actually need, but we tell ourselves we need. Why do we need season tickets to a game which requires so much energy and resources to build that stadium and all this other crap? Why do we need all this shit, yet we're criticizing people who are putting a bit of food away, criticizing people who are putting away ammo because they know someday the police might not be able to save their ass, or they might actually have to go out and hunt their own food, and hunting ain't easy. And we're trying to upload a video right now about hunting, but YouTube is giving us the gears. They really don't want us to show you stuff that you need to know in order to survive. And I don't think it's because, they want just a bunch of dullards walking around, a bunch of liabilities in the apocalypse. It's just the way the system is stupid. It's set up in such a way that it's dumb. Everything that we should be teaching ourselves right now, we're not. I seen a story the other day where I think it was in Moscow, or not, maybe not Moscow, but it was in Russia somewhere. And the teacher brought in a moose, a dead moose. And they were teaching the class, this is like a high school, they were teaching them how to, they probably already had it gutted, but how to quarter a moose, how to skin it, gut it, butcher it, cook it up, the whole 9 yards. Teaching kids that skill. We don't teach, and we might think, well, we're never going to use those skills because, technology, right? And we're highly urbanized right now. And arguably, yes, when the shit hits the fan, the animals are going to quickly be hunted to extinction, which is why we should all consider animal husbandry if we do want a reliable protein source. I totally get that. But these are still skills that are transferable. If you can butcher a moose, you could probably butcher a cow type thing. So, and I'm not saying it's a one-to-one, but you see how I have to cover all my bases because I can see that guy in that comment section just waiting to hang on everything I say, making one mistake, and he's going to pounce on it. Anyways, get your ammo, get your food. Don't mistake this seeming lull in global crises that we're currently, just embrace it. Just embrace it. Because they're telegraphing that we're going to see a cyber attack. And they're conditioning us to that. Just like they did with that movie Contagion 10 years ago. And it's not even so much conditioning. It's just they know that these things are eventually going to happen. Like they know that the law of probabilities dictates that there was going to be a pandemic. That's why since 2014, some of the first videos I made were talking about how there's going to be a pandemic, it's going to be a dystopian nightmare, and it's coming soon. And it wasn't because I'm Nostradamus, it wasn't because I was part of the plan, it's because the law of probabilities dictates that cyber attacks have been increasing by about 30% year over year. And there's more Internet of Things added to the society every year. So it's only a matter of time before the big one hits, and they all know it. So they're saying, you better get ready for it. And that movie, it really brings to light. It's a great cultural critique of the divisive nature of what we've become and how we are going to be our own worst enemies when the shit hits the fan. Anyways, guys, let's talk about that movie. I'm going to turn this off. I'm going to upload this, and then I'm going to shoot that video.